Time's up, Admiral.
Here it comes.
Chevron 1, loaded.
For my ally is the Force, and the powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Cry hammer, and let's set the tongues of war.
Chevron 2 is loaded.
Conan, what is best in life? Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, to hear the lamentation of your women.
It's all in the reflexes.
Well, also said you're heavy into martial arts, Tai Chi and all that killer stuff.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
Chevron 3 encoded.
And somebody ought to belt you in the mouth. But I won't. I won't. The hell I will.
Chevron 4 encoded.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Chevron 5 encoded.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Chevron 6 encoded.
That's the line you can, monkey boy.
Great Scott. Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
You shall not pass! I thought I'd die fighting side by side with Al.
What about side by side with a friend?
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
Chevron 7 is locked.
Hail and howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Saturday Night Drive. And went on break for a little bit, but we're back. It's the holiday season, and I am very happy to be here tonight because this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Jed, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Excited to be here after the holiday break and my birthday, as you can see. For fans of The Office out there, my fiance Rachel made a banner from The Office for me that it is your birthday. But excited to be back. Had a little break, but ready and rearing to go to talk about a Hollywood classic.
Yes. Hail and howdy to the chat. We're happy to have you guys here. And listen, I'm always nervous when I have to put Jed in front of a movie that I dearly love. Now, sometimes it's like, okay, sometimes it's schlock and I'm okay with it, but this is truly something that is, to me, an incredible movie. I mean, I first saw this, The Lion in Winter, 1968. There's a 2003 version starring Sir Patrick Stewart and Glenn Close that we don't talk about. We don't care about that one. This is the real deal. Won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Actress, Best Screenplay, and Best Soundtrack, Best Score. And was a massive success and is just, wow, blew me away. I mean, the first time I saw this was literally over 20 years ago now. I was actually...
Oh, don't lie. You were there in the theater.
I was not there. I'm not that old. I was taking a medieval Europe class, and we watched it because we were doing a section of the class on William Marshall. And, of course, William Marshall is present in this movie, and the professor showed us the movie, and I was just blown away. And until I actually owned it, this is one of those movies that whenever it was on, I would stop everything I was doing and sit down and watch it because I could not look away. Because there is nothing wasted in this movie. Not a line, not a scene, not a performance, not the production value, not the soundtrack. I mean, Jed, I could go on and on. How are you feeling as we begin this today?
So you were concerned I wasn't going to like this. Is that fair to say?
I'm not concerned. I'm just always worried. But I mean, this is cinema. This is cinema, and I can always count on you to love cinema. So please tell me you enjoyed it.
I loved this film. It
Thank
was
you.
incredibly well
Thank
written,
you.
well acted. This is what filmmaking should be. It
Yes.
felt like a Shakespeare play. It really did, from the amount of language complexity that was brought to the table, the stellar performances. I couldn't believe that Shakespeare had not written this. Like, that's how deeply profound I found this film. And I doubt that we've had a film of this depth.
Oh, no,
in
we had not.
Decades upon decades. I don't think Hollywood's capable of something
You're
like
not.
this.
First, let's look at the cast. Before we get into the characters and performances, you have Sir Peter O'Toole as Henry II, Katharine Hepburn as Eleanor of Aquitaine, Sir Anthony Hopkins as Richard the Lionheart, and I forget the dude who played Jeffrey. I never remember his name. You got John Nigel as John. And you have a young Timothy Dalton as Philip II.
I didn't know it was him till I looked it up.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see Rassilon and James Bond in this film randomly. Funnily enough, John was actually in Doctor Who as well. The episode in season 4 with,
you're right,
with Donna and Martha, and the hat,
right,
and the sauce. Sauce.
I mean, John Nigel, he was also King Arthur in Excalibur. I mean, John Nigel has had a career too. I mean, there is not a missed casting in this movie, and it's the caliber. You can't find this anymore. And this is 1968, the end of the golden age of Hollywood. And
the extras are better actors in this film than Hollywood celebrities, A-listers of today. It's not even close.
I know. And to top it off, John Barry, the man who did James Bond soundtrack. And we've had a non-James Bond John Barry soundtrack when we did Black Hole, and all we heard was James Bond. You don't hear James Bond in this soundtrack at all.
Not at all.
It's
I didn't know it was the same guy.
It's gothic. It's choral. It's just it blows you away. All right. We'll start with that opening theme when it begins. It just grabs you instantly, doesn't it?
It was that music that got me invested in this film, because I didn't know anything about this film. I didn't watch a trailer. I didn't research it all. Didn't look at the cast list. I knew that Peter O'Toole was in it because you'd mentioned it, and a few other people were in it, but I didn't know anything about it, about the plot or anything like that. But as soon as that music hit, I was like, okay, this is a serious film. This isn't gonna be some pseudo stage performance that's just filmed. It's a serious soundtrack, and it latched me on immediately. That's when I was invested. So before any dialogue, I was invested.
Yeah, and this movie is what Game of Thrones wishes it is. This is true political intrigue, and it all happens in a night, Christmas Eve. It all happens in one night. The web weaving, the backstabbing, everything. It is glorious. And as pointed out, I was going to say it's 1183 on Christmas Eve, and Henry II, in the wake of Henry III's death, now has to deal with succession because there's a contest of wills. His wife, Eleanor Aquitaine, the historical accuracy is there. She legitimately raised rebellions against him, which is why she's imprisoned in Salisbury. He has her locked up. And she wants Richard because he's next in line. But because Richard sides with her, Henry wants John. And nobody cares about Jeffrey, which is...
He's a bit of a sociopath.
Oh, Jeffrey, as the line says, he's all wheels and gears. There's no humanity in him. It's all scheming. I mean, as we get into this now, this is one of the best things about this movie. As every character is introduced, you know who they are and what they're for instantly through emotes, through everything. I mean, Henry training John in the opening scene, big, masculine, authoritative, has power, gravitas. John is a whelp. And as later on, as Richard says, this walking pustule. I mean, it's just he is John, who turns out in history to be nothing but a philanderer, a weak king, and everything else that under possible. I mean, the way that he's portrayed in the Robin Hood lore is true. He's weak, he's ineffective, and all he wants to do is fuck the Baron's wives. That's all, and Duke's wives. That's all he wants to do. Fuck around.
He was so bad that they wrote the Magna Carta.
Yes. So and then after Henry sends out the calling, let's have everybody come to Shinon for Christmas, we see William goes to Richard first, and Richard, consummate soldier, sometime poet, as he calls himself, in that jousting match, you don't get a word from him in Anthony Hopkins' introduction when he takes off the helmet and is basically the sword of Damocles over that downed knight. Dun 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 dun. He's gonna kill him or not because he's possessed, and you can see it. Anthony Hopkins, young Anthony Hopkins. Jed, were you surprised when he took that helmet off?
Well, I knew he was in the film, but I wasn't sure which character he played. I didn't know he was playing Richard, but yeah, that single scene I think is his best performance in the film because just like you're saying, he's a soldier and the bloodlust was in him. He very much reminded me of a classic Viking, and that would be his heritage at this point, right? Little Viking blood.
This is way after the Great Heathen Army. Yeah, the Plantagenet is long after because England's a full nation now. And that was before England was a nation. Yeah. So.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, you could see that ancestry in him. That was the thought that I had is, he's a Viking berserker right now. He is not going to be stopped. And it was all in his emoting. And I love Anthony Hopkins. He's absolutely a fantastic actor. But the last 20 years, which are the majority of the films I've seen him in, it felt like he's been phoning it in. But it's been great to go back to some of his earlier work with Zorro and this to see, wow, he deserves his place among the greats.
Yes.
He deserves the knighthood he received. And with the exception of Thor, the first Thor movie, the last 20 years, he's just been collecting paychecks. And I can't blame him for that. He's at the point where I would do the same thing at his age.
And he's based as hell about it. He's based as hell about it. This is his most famous line in the past couple of years. I'm an actor. It doesn't matter what I think. Don't listen to me. Based as hell.
It's a great perspective.
Great perspective. I'm just an actor. Don't listen to me. My opinion sucks.
We can't understate with this character. There's some diversity in it. I don't know if we want to spoil that yet. But...
We'll get to that because that is one of the complexities of this script. Because I didn't know about this till I saw this movie and learned about it when we were watching in class. That Richard was I didn't know about that. I didn't know.
That's why he did the Crusades, get away from all the women, and no one would question him.
Well, that's the thing. Historically, he got captured while on crusade, and he got married, but he never got to consummate the marriage because he got captured. And he probably would have tried, to move the line forward, but he did not. So it was, I guess, known but not known. I mean, there's a line later on where Henry goes, Richard's stories make it into all kinds of places. Why don't you tell me yours? When he's talking to Philip when they're in Philip's bedroom. And sheet on. But yeah, we'll get into that because
who follows up on King Richard and King John?
I don't know. Actually, it goes Richard, then William Marshall, because he was regent before John took over. That's how it went because there was it was contested because I mean this whole movie is based about, of course, who's going to be succession, who will win, Eleanor or Henry, and at one point, as Henry says, you've led too many rebellions against me. I can't let you out. She says, I almost won the last one. Historically, she won the next one because Henry was too old at that point. He was sick. And everybody in this movie did band together and fight Henry. Every major player in this movie, they all banded together and did fight Henry because Eleanor did escape eventually from her tower. And
you can definitely see the build up to that. You can definitely see everyone banding together against him, especially after he was taking that other wife. That really stirred things up among all of them. Really was a uniting force.
Yeah, and so Richard did become king because they beat Henry down and he was sick and they took it from him. So she did win in the end. Even though I'm rooting for Henry all the way in this, just because I love it. I just love his behavior throughout the whole thing. But so.
I can understand his dilemma because I wouldn't want any of these three sons to take the throne because the bloodlust is not a great thing in a king. That's probably the big thing.
Richard went on crusade too much. History shows us he spent his entire time as king on crusade. He didn't govern. The piece that Henry stumbles onto, Richard didn't maintain it. He went on crusade. John was he was terrible. Like you said, they needed the Magna Carta to rein him in. Jeffrey didn't do shit. Jeffrey's kind of wiped from history.
I didn't know he existed. I didn't know there was
neither did I until this movie.
I mean, I can see why. He's definitely a sociopath. There's definitely something wrong with him.
So after you get you know who Richard is in that moment, it's all great. Then you go to Jeffrey as you watch him on a cliff, just sending men to kill each other, and watching with a shit-eating grin on his face. And then you get Eleanor, statuesque in her gilded cage, so to speak, summoned. So, it's time to go. Okay.
I love the idea that, she's in prison, right, because of her failed rebellions, but she looks the most royal out of anyone in this film. Like, Henry does not look like a king. Yeah, he looks like a wealthy man, but he never wears royal gowns, never really wears a crown. I don't think he ever wears the crown.
Once. When Philip arrives, he puts on a nice robe, puts on the crown, greets, but then as soon as they go back into private quarters, takes it off, tosses it on the end of a chair, and sits with his leg over the armrest of the chair. I love.
He's a very casual man.
Yes, but he's a warrior. Because the line, done at 21, King of England at 21, united the lands.
And now he's one of the oldest people around. Being 50, I think he said he was.
Yeah. He's got a decade on the Pope.
in that era, 50 was pretty old.
He's the oldest man he knows.
Mentor.
Yeah, but I mean, he and I love his line. If not for women in my life, I would have conquered all of Europe. women ruined my life.
Well, at least of the women that we see in this film, it's an accurate way to describe.
Yeah, I mean, listen. Katharine Hepburn's performance of Eleanor is beautiful. She won Best Actress for a reason. Now Peter O'Toole wasn't for Best Actor. He didn't win. I need to check who won in 1968. I'm sure Legatos will look it up while we're talking right now. I need to, because I got to know who beat him out in 1968 for this role, because this is my favorite Peter O'Toole movie. I love Lawrence of Arabia. I love so many other things, but this movie, he is Henry II, and I am just blown away. The bellowing, the diction, the point to point. I mean, the back and forth between Henry and Eleanor. Oh, wow. Just tit for tat, every line, this and that. Henry, I have a confession to make. I don't very much like our children. And when you get to the dialogue of this movie, it's so serious at times, but then when the humor kind of slips in there, it just nails it. There's a moment when they're all gathered outside after the meeting, or it's after, it's right after Henry's decided to fake give it to Richard, and John's moaning, groaning. Nobody cares about me. If I was on fire, no one would piss on me to put me out. And Richard just goes, let's strike a flint and find out. It's British droll. Is what it is.
It's very much dry humor, but there's a lot of great ones. Like when Richard was gonna go see the Pope to get his marriage annulled, he's like, "Oh, you don't believe I'm gonna go? Well, you'll be saying that to my horse's ass in the morning."
And then she replies, "You won't have a kingdom when you get back." And then the return to that is, "Oh, you should have said that. If you'd promised you'd be good, I would have let you and your boys run around free. But now I'm gonna lock you all up." And all right, so we're kind of going to, I think the best way to do this, we're going to roll through the movie. And we have to do it because every scene is gold. I mean, I have my favorite moments, but
so do I.
Every scene is just glorious. So everybody arrives, and you have that elegant track of Eleanor going down the river and the singing and the great shots. And he welcomes her. Did the seas part for you? He says, only as I commanded. They did it. They get on there, and then it begins. Right out of the gate, it begins. The back and forth, and everybody arrives. And as they all come together, it's who's going to be king? Who's going to be king? You can't all be king. And once they're all together, it's preparing for Philip to come. And we're going to blow through it quickly, because I want to get to the major points. At one point, before we get there, though, Henry's talking with Alice, who is sister to Philip and sort of stepdaughter to Eleanor, who raised her, the only child she didn't bear that she loves. Because you gotta understand, she mentions it. Eleanor had 2 daughters with Louis, the previous king of France. I forget which Louis it is, what number.
There's so many of them.
And she had 3 with Henry and 4 sons. So she was a baby machine. And of course, they set up the whole thing here. in terms of, and this is what I love about this movie, because not only do you get these great characters, but you get historical lore dumps just woven into this great dialogue. The movie immediately, when Henry's first talking to Alice, and then we learn about Eleanor, the idea of dowries is introduced, which was the most important thing. That's what made, that we mentioned him again, William Marshall, so important. He was the third son of his line, so he was sent out to be knight, but he also won one of the women that had the biggest land dowries that could be out there, which is why he was powerful, why he was Henry's second in command. But Eleanor, when Henry married her, stole her from Louis, she had the Aquitaine, the most fertile province in France. And Alice has the Vexin, which is a county that is 20 miles from Paris. And there's a line later on where Philip goes, the Vexin is, either you marry Alice and Richard or I take the Vexin back. And Henry goes, I'm not going to give it back. Why? Because my troops are all over it. I love that so much. So he's talking to Alice, and we learn about that she has dowry, we learn about Eleanor's dowry and this and that. And Jed, I know as a historian, you appreciate when they work this kind of proper history exposition into well-crafted dialogue.
Oh, absolutely. It really immerses the world building. In a historical piece like this, the same rules of world building apply as if you're creating your own fantasy universe like Tolkien. You really have to make it feel three-dimensional, even if it's stuff that most people are already aware of. Like if you're doing an adaptation of Queen Elizabeth I, a lot of people will know some of the basics about her, but you still got to incorporate it in a way that makes sense to people and makes it feel like there's more than just this one castle. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about this movie is, yes, the whole thing really takes place in this one castle.
Whole thing, yeah.
Besides a little bit at the very, very beginning and the hills, but that's still pretty close to that same castle. Everything happens in this one little area, and a lesser filmmaker and writer would have accidentally made it feel like that was the whole world. Like you don't really know what's going on outside of it. The same problem we had with Equilibrium. We're like, hey, is the rest of the world like this? What the hell's going on? Are there other ramifications to what they're doing in the broader scheme of things? But in this one, it makes it very clear in a natural way where all the players on the board are, like his soldiers near Paris, King Philip's interests and everything going on, and everyone negotiating what lands they have rights to in England.
Excellent point.
That it feels like a full breadth of a nation that they're controlling. It doesn't feel claustrophobic. It's not claustrophobic storytelling, even though it's all in one castle. And that's just very impressive and incredibly. And what helps that as well is the production design. Just to mention that briefly, so many little details, like using the candles as clocks, just the little numbers. That's such a beautiful thing that no one would think about. Like if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. But by seeing it, I was like, oh, that's such a nice detail. They didn't need to do that, but I appreciate the effort to make this world feel real. And it does.
The detail of when Henry and Alice wake up on Christmas Eve morning, the frozen bowl, the ice is it's like, yes, it's an old middle-aged castle, and it's winter.
Have internal heating.
It's winter in England. The water's going to be frozen, and Henry just breaks it and throws the ice out, and they're huddled in their quilts and this and that. The production value, they nail everything. Everything looks right, feels right. When Philip arrives, they're kicking chickens out of the way on the stairs as they're going down, because that's the time. There was
very distinct lived-in quality because of that.
Because England and France are two completely different things. In France, you've got the grandeur and this that. This is England. It was dirty in that up in there at that time, and the king was much more on the ground than the royalty in France. So in France, you have pomp and circumstance when you go. I don't know if Versailles was a thing yet at that point, but you had that kind of stuff going on. Big palaces, a lot of pages, a lot of servants of that. Nope, here comes the king kicking chickens out of the way to greet another king. Dogs everywhere. The peasants happily walking around. The feel. You feel the world. And like you said, they make sure to let you know it's a bigger world. Constantly refer to the fact that Geoffrey is Duke of Brittany. That's a peninsula on the north western corner of France. And Philip wants that back. And constantly you hear in all his dealings, he wants Brittany back because that's part of the continent. But England owns it at this point, and that's a foothold. You don't want to give that up. That's a foothold on the main continent. All these things, the Aquitaine, who has the Aquitaine, who has the Vexin. You understand? And then when they mention later in the movie, oh, we got to go visit the Pope. That's Italy. That's a long-ass trip back then. So you feel it's the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's glorious. Because it's history. And that's one of the reasons I love this movie so much. It's history. And you have to respect what happened there to understand how everything breaks down. Because even right there, you realize it's the beginning of all the royal families intermarrying that leads to the intermarrying and all the problems that happened in the 20th century. So I love it. All right. So Philip arrives and the beginning negotiations.
I do just want to say real quick, because of this deep world building, it's not just for the sake of making it feel real and three-dimensional. It helps character development as well. Like Philip, he's not a hugely developed character, I would say. Like, we don't spend a whole lot of time on him, but because of the way that they make it so clear what lands are owned by who and on what relationship they have and the quality of these lands in such subtle ways. Like, they don't just sit down and exposite to us. Like, it's woven into the narrative through the whole piece. I understand why Philip is doing what he's doing. And I don't see him as a bad guy for it. Some people might perceive him to be a villain of the story to a certain extent or taking advantage of the situation. But I don't blame him. He's the king of France. He wants France to be whole. That's not a bad thing. Yeah.
He's ready because he has daddy issues because his father loved Henry more than he loved him after everything Henry did to him. There's a great line when he says, you beat him down in every war. You stole his wife. You took his lands. And he loved you for it. And he says he was a loving man. And Henry replies, he was a loving man, and you learned nothing from him. And just the hatred. I mean, even though Philip has very little to do overall, he has his own story in this. Everything he does is for vengeance on Henry for what he did to his personal life. I mean, all right, well, I guess we'll get to it now. Let's jump to it because we're talking about Philip when we get to it. So you learn in this movie, let's set up with this. So at one point when Eleanor is beginning her scheme to try and get the Aquitaine who she gave to Richard so she can use it as a bargaining chip to force Henry to acknowledge Richard as his rightful heir. In order to get it from him at one point, they're having these discussions, and it's right after he's given it to her. There's the failed marriage attempt in the hallway, and now they've learned that John is in active collusion with Geoffrey and Philip to betray Henry, and that's treason. And now Eleanor has her moment, and in one moment she says to Richard, "Go visit Philip and do anything to get his allegiance in what we're going to do, his part in this." And at that point, you have no idea what she's talking about. I mean, I've seen this movie dozens of times. So in that moment, I hear the inflection in Katharine Hepburn's voice.
She was definitely suggesting it.
She knows everything. So we get this fantastic scene in Philip's bedroom where everybody except Eleanor goes through there and all have these fantastic conversations where finally, after first it's Geoffrey and it's well John got there first and he was hiding first. Then Geoffrey gets there and Geoffrey and Philip are colluding. Then John is there and yells at Geoffrey. They're all yelling at each other. Geoffrey's trying to manipulate everything, and then a knock on the door and it's Richard. So everybody's hiding behind tapestries and Richard comes in. And after some very delicate and masterful performances between Anthony Hopkins and Timothy Dalton, you get this one line: "Why didn't you write to me? Because I didn't think you'd answer." And so they're going, oh, what's this? What's this?
Something's going on.
And then in a very incredible performance, they're gay together. Richard is a homosexual. And as a few minutes later, when Philip is going to be confronted by Henry, he says, "What is the law of the land for boys who sleep with boys?" And there's such an excellent contradiction in that moment. We'll get to that, come back to that in a second. So at one moment, you think that, and you have to understand the scope of this. Richard is trying to convince Philip to join his side. He needs troops so that he can attack because his guys are all the way in Poitiers and he can't get to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like they're about to get it on. And you have to realize in that moment, John and Jeffrey are in the room.
Oh, and Philip's doing it on purpose, I imagine. Because, he wants to leverage Richard's sexuality to his own benefit, as we see in a few minutes here.
Yeah.
So, he's 100% like, all right, if you're going to do this, they're listening. So now's the time.
Oh, and I'm just going, and as the years go on and I watch over and I always go, oh, man. And then knock, knock, here's Henry. And then you have a brilliant exchange between Peter O'Toole and Timothy Dalton, Henry and Philip, about basically character. And it's the whole point of it is Henry comes in there to measure the breadth of Philip's character, who he is, how he'll behave. And it's his lesson to him about this is how a king behaves. You've given me everything I know about you, and I've told you nothing about my plans. I win. But then you learn that Philip doesn't care because he planned all of this for years, for this one moment to reveal to Henry his relationship with Richard. So Philip isn't gay, but he allowed himself to be in a relationship with Richard just for he literally says, so for this moment where I could tell your father with you right here and your brothers behind the tapestries that you're a whore.
Well, and it makes it so much more interesting when you find out that when they were first getting together in France, Richard and Philip was only 15, and he made that realization that I can use this to avenge my father. I can destroy Henry with this knowledge, and began planning. And it took him, I don't know how old he's supposed to be in the
17.
film. But
he's 17. It's been 2 years.
Okay, so it's just 2 years. I thought it was longer than that. He looks much older.
Yeah, he's 17.
But 2 years, and he's that young, and he realizes this is my chance, and he literally sits there and takes it.
Yes. And the performance, the physical performance of Peter O'Toole as he's sitting there listening to Philip describe their first moment together in the forest. Peter O'Toole's just sitting like, that is emoting. Current Hollywood, that is what giving a performance without a single word is. The expression on his face, the complete disgust. And now I want to stop here for a second as Richard begs Henry to leave. And Henry doesn't want to hear this. Let's go back to the beginning of the movie for a moment. When Richard,
I think I know what you're going to talk about.
When Henry and Alice are together and Henry's telling her how much he loves her, he goes, I have known all manner of women and little boys. Now,
I wasn't sure if that's what he was implying. When I first heard that at the beginning of the film, I was like, did he just say? I think he just said.
Here's the thing. And this is from that class where I watched this movie in. Here's a very awkward bit of reality. Knights of the Realm, during that period of time, if you were the third son, first son is the heir, second son goes to the clergy, third son, you're pushed out into the world. You got to make your way on your own if you're in any sort of aristocratic noble family. William Marshall went out there and was a knight. And Knights of the Realm, when they were out there, they were getting it on with each other because it was seen as a bonding experience.
And I'm sure there's a little bit of the whole like prison dilemma going on there when that's all you got.
Part of what it is. A lot of that was going on there, and little boys, the squires, they were there too. So I mean,
the most feminine.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So Henry, and of course, even Eleanor makes a joke at one point that he's done goats as well. At one point, when she does one jab earlier on, plenty of goats, and he's done that as well. He admits to buggery. We'll use the safe term, the buggery. So in that moment, and that's the beauty of this script, Henry is disgusted at hearing this, but he's a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite.
And the script doesn't have to point it out. Like after the
No.
scene, we don't need him sitting down like I had, relations with these people, and I like we didn't need that. They knew the audience was smart enough to connect those events. And another great example of this that is one of my favorite scenes in the movie is that big fight that they had about getting annulled, Henry and his wife, and she starts talking about sleeping with his dad, and the impact of that is just freaking him out, grossing him out, the fact that he has to run away when he is physically doing that to his own sons. Throughout the film, early in the film, there was discussions of whether or not John or Richard would marry Alice. And that's the exact situation he's putting his sons in. And he's getting disgusted by it, but he has no awareness of the hypocrisy of his own actions. And yet it's so subtly done that we don't need someone to stand there and point at him and say, hey, you're a hypocrite. The audience can say, hey, you're doing that to your son, yet you're grossed out. I can see the contradictions there, which makes him such a fascinating three-dimensional character.
Now, did you know that this is not Peter O'Toole's first performance as Henry II? There's a prequel movie to this called Becket, where it's him and Thomas Becket, his prime minister, chancellor, whatever you would call it back then, and their relationship. So there is a previous movie to this. So this is actually a sequel in a way. I've never actually seen Becket because I've never been able to get my hands on it. But my mom always says it was decent. She said this is the superior movie. But so there is because at one point Eleanor mentions Thomas Becket and she says, I slept with him. And Henry goes, that's a lie. She says, I know, but I just wanted to say it. So all these fights. I mean, you mentioned the annulment fight. There's all the backs and the forth, and I'm not going to try and quote them because I would butcher the brilliant lines. I know my favorite moments. Like at one point, one of my favorite moments in the tapestry thing is when Henry's in there and he goes, "I know that this and that. I know that John loves me," and Jeffrey just goes, woof. And there's John. And John just goes, you turd. You turd. I love that.
John is definitely the least eloquent person in this film. And it fits with his character, but it is kind of jarring sometimes. And it's supposed to be that way. It was done intentionally, of course, but he definitely stands out as very different. The boy, I wouldn't trust him. I don't see this love that Henry keeps talking about. He's like, he loves me. No, he's Jeffrey said it perfectly. As much a glutton loves his sandwich.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then that following scene where he retreats to Eleanor and Alice, and he starts to try and lay the blame for the failure of their sons on both of them. And she goes, Richard may be mine, but John is all yours. I had no part in what you made him into. And during that scene, also during the tapestry scene, when Richard looks at Jeffrey, he goes, think of you? I don't think of you at all. It's so cold. And when during the introduction, just to how Jeffrey, his hatred, when Eleanor says you have a gift for hatred, because nobody ever cared about him. When Eleanor arrives, she praises Richard. She says, Johnny looks like Henry's been good to you. And she just goes, Jeffrey, and moves on. It's so...
There's a reason he turned out the way he did. It was very much by nurturing or lack thereof that made him this way. It was not his nature, at least not entirely.
Yeah. I want to praise every little bit of this, but where do you want to go? What's your next favorite moment that you maybe want to talk about?
My favorite moment in the film is a conversation between the queen and her three sons in her chambers after she's given up. The moment she gives up and Richard comes in trying to fight more, but I've lost enough times that I know I've lost. But specifically, the speech she says about the knife. I love that little mini speech she gives. It's 1183, deal. We're barbarians.
We all have knives.
That whole speech about history is made by us, and we're the ones who start war. And just that little monologue that she had, that was my favorite probably performance in the film. I absolutely love those few moments.
That moment when it's just Katharine Hepburn and she's by herself looking in the mirror. How could he have left you? That's the part. That's the beginning of that. That's probably the moment that won her the Oscar. That scene, that entire scene, because her gear shift when she's being gentle, this and that. And then she just goes, everybody shut up. In that one, it's just such a quick burst of rage. And then she just pulls it back in. And that's Katharine Hepburn. That's a masterclass. Just every single major actor and actress in this, these are masterclass performances. And Katharine Hepburn is just nailing it. Every little tilt of a word, every little curve of the sound, the tone, the expressions. I mean, one of my favorite moments is when she's wooing Richard in the garden. Oh, look, there's a garden scene and people are applauding. Gee, George, where'd you get that from? Anyway, she takes out a needle and opens her arm up in order to get here. I'll write the contract in my flesh. And then Richard goes, Mother. And then all his bravado about hating her melts away because his mother hurt herself. And then you love little lamb, and then you jump to Henry. Oh, I would love to be a fly in that room. I taught you numbers, little lamb. It's like, and he knew exactly what she was gonna do. And that's that little bit. It's the little things that make this such a great movie. And then you get to the fallout when, as you said, when Henry decides, I have no sons. Oh, you have enough sons.
Oh, that was a great moment.
You have enough sons to populate an entire village. Bastards. I mean, and yes, this is that time. Kings effed around. And she proves she effed around too. Let's get the tally of bread sheets you've spread yourself out on. And then it's tit for tat. It's perfect delivery. And he goes out there in that moment. Damn you, God. And the music is just, it pulls out, and it's a bird's eye view of Henry just lying there, just defeated because he's been betrayed by everybody. And he goes to that last resort. Well, I'm going to make another kid. I'm just going to make another kid. The Pope owes me one
just
pontificate. Start over. And here's the thing. Alice, who has had as great a role in this as everything, the pawn, kings and queens and bishops and knights, and I'm the only pawn. What a line. What a line. And she is the one who has said, I'm the most dangerous, and Henry, how dangerous can I be if I don't go along with this? And in that moment, when he comes to her and says, we're going to get married. Pope's going to marry her himself. It's going to be great. And she talks him down because she says, you've locked up your sons, and you realize they either have to be locked up forever or you have to kill them because they're going to kill me and whatever baby we spawn. And for a minute, and leading up to that, I love when William Marshall goes to get the boys, and John is in bed after having effed some maid. Jeffrey gets startled and tries to scramble away, and Richard is hiding in a corner, ready to strike and fight his way out. But William Marshall, who was the greatest warrior in the land, got to remember that, he is the man. He has soldiers in there. They get them all down there, and they're trapped in the cellar. And Henry's now going to go, and you think he's going to go kill him. And Eleanor bribes a guard. And this is here's another favorite scene of mine. I want to know how you feel about this, because this is it's an ugly scene, but it's beautifully ugly. And when I say ugly, not because it's shot poorly, just its context. She bribes the guard to take her down to the cellar. That fight scene between those two guards in front of the cellar, what did you think of that?
That's actually one of my few criticisms of the film, is the general fight choreography of the film. I know it's the 60s and things were a little bit different back then, but I've seen fight scenes from that era that far surpassed this. It was really bad. The training at the beginning, this fight scene.
I don't count the training. See, I love this fight scene because I don't think it's supposed to be a fight scene. It's supposed to be two dudes grappling, and all you hear are the sounds of the fighting and the death. I love it. I think it's
I like
grisly.
that idea. I think it could have been done a lot better though, because they're both wearing the same thing and their faces are covered. That I was losing track of who was who I'm supposed to be rooting for. The angles were way too close. The sound
Okay.
effects weren't matching what was going on. Like the idea of this just being a brutal, like this isn't a sword fight. There's not enough room to do a real good sword fight and it being a grapple. I like that idea. I just think even for the era, people are going to say it's the 60s, you have to forgive it. I think even for the era that they were capable of a lot more. With this type of talent, this was a high budget movie. So I think they had the budget to do a lot better than they did in that scene and the other fight scenes.
See, I don't count the other fight scenes because I don't think there's supposed to be any fight scenes. Like the jousting scene, it's supposed to be a blip and over. The training thing, I don't count that either. That's just the start. But this scene, I do love this scene because to me, I like the grittiness of it. I like the raw murder that happens there, the betrayal. And it sends to me the rawness of it. And I actually really like it. I'm not looking at the choreography. I'm looking at the feeling of it.
Did her bribed guard, because I love the bribery scene. There's no dialogue in the bribery scene. That scene was fantastic. Her just holding that ring. But did that guard hide the body? Did Richard not see, or Henry not see the body when he came downstairs a few minutes later?
He must have. It might be in a scene that was cut. He must have done it because after that, the guard is gone. So he must have rolled it because remember, it's a castle. There's a lot of darkness. It's the middle of the night. So.
Because if he had left the body there and Henry had ignored it, that would have been a big problem for that scene. And if he went off and hit it, that's fine.
Well, see, we never actually see it because when Henry arrives, because now this is for a what's the word I want? Shit, I just lost the word. For the climactic moment in here. Eleanor just wants her boys to escape. She said, I just want you to get out of here, make a run for it. But suddenly they shift to regicide and patricide. And she goes, whoa, hold on a second. That's not what this is for. It's one thing to win on the field of battle and, usurp, but you're now talking about cold murder. And
she's absolutely not okay with that because her relationship with Henry is complicated, that's for sure, but she cares for him in her own twisted way. She can't bear to see him die.
Their final moment there, we'll get it. So then Henry arrives, and the confrontation of what are we going to do here? This is treason, this and that. And then they all get the daggers. And I love that moment. Jeffrey going, and John just goes, but then Richard tries to fight him. And this is one of my, top 3 favorite lines. Well, come at me. You're Richard, aren't you? But you're Henry. Oh, I love it. And then that's the thing. Then they have to give up. And then there's that moment of, is he going to kill? Of course, historically, didn't kill him. Because this is, but and he says, I'm going to be your executioner. And he goes through the whole litany of he gives his full titles before God. And it looks like he's going to do it, and then just flatted the blade on Richard's shoulder. And then he just collapses onto the ground, spent. And I love the shot of how Jeffrey and John just get the F out, but Richard calmly walks away. Just calmly walks away. And then that moment, that final touching moment between Eleanor and Henry where you don't know what pain is because I lost you. And you realize, and then, like you said, it's twisted, but she still loves him. The whole movie of everything back and forth, the horrible things they've said to each other, the horrible things they've tried to do to each other. And in that raw moment, she still loves him. And in his own twisted way, he still loves her.
It's not healthy.
No.
It's complicated, but it's fascinating.
It's just glorious. And just that, and then their final moment as she's getting set out to sea again. You know what? I wish why don't we live forever? I wish we could live forever. It's just like, we could try.
We could try.
We could try.
No. You probably won't like that I made this comparison, but while watching that scene when their interaction in the cellar right before the scene change, my brain immediately went to a very bad thing, which isn't fair for this film.
Okay.
When she's like, "You don't know what loss is. I've lost so much more. I don't care about losing land and money and whatnot." I immediately thought She-Hulk telling the Hulk that because she gets catcalled, she suffers more than him.
That's, you know what?
And they're not comparable in reality.
You've been damaged by modern crap.
I have been damaged.
You've been
They're not comparable. This is very well written, but I don't know why my brain just immediately went, "Oh, she got catcalled, didn't she?"
So, and we could spend so much more on this movie if we did a scene by scene breakdown. This is one of those times I would actually have to take notes because I'd have to remember the precise moments. But we have only so much time. And is there anything else?
I would like to ask you a question.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So I know how you feel about this, but from the film's intention, separating how you react to it, do you think this film has a legitimate protagonist?
No,
because I know you're very much pro Henry.
I've always been pro Henry, and what I feel is that it's both of them. Henry is supposed to be Henry and Eleanor, I think, because they are prominent on all the original promotional material. Peter O'Toole, Katharine Hepburn. Because I used the poster I cut out today for the thumbnail. Peter O'Toole, Katharine Hepburn. They headline this. So I think it's both of them. I think it's both of them. So it is I like Henry the most, maybe because it's the masculinity. I like it, but I respect what Eleanor's doing because she's trying to protect her interests. Because of the line, she says, "You can make more sons, I can't." She's protecting her interests. So I love it. And it does it hits me in the historical reality that she does win in the end, that Eleanor wins. But I have to accept that. But hell, Henry was still he was one of the greatest kings of England because he ruled for a long time in that period, 21 to 50. That's
for that era,
and
that's
he ruled
insane.
longer. I mean, he ruled for another few years after that, so he ruled for over 30 years as King of England. And that time, that's a long, long time. Real quick, Jay Fraser, 360 for 10 British pounds. Hail, Jed and Adam. I recommend Beckett. We mentioned Beckett earlier in the stream with Richard Burton and Thomas Beckett and Peter O'Toole as Henry II. And it is a prequel to Lion and Winter. Also, congrats, Adam, on going to the gate. Yes, Jay Fraser, I give you all the credit. Your shout out. We'll have you there, and I'll mention that at the end of the stream, and I'll be mentioning it tomorrow on Roundtable. But Jay Fraser gets all the credit for what I will announce. Yes, we mentioned Beckett about, I think, 20 minutes ago that I mentioned that this is technically the sequel to Beckett. So this was not Peter O'Toole's first outing in Henry II. Thank you, Jay Fraser, for the 10 British pounds. So, Jed, you have anything else you want to bring up? Because I can go on and on. So
the reason I was asking that question is because I think a lot of people's takeaway would be that Katharine Hepburn was the antagonist of the film. That's a perception that I can see. It's not one I agree with, but that is one that I can see.
Yeah.
But she's definitely an antagonistic force through a lot of it manipulating, and you don't know where her loyalties lie. But that scene that we referenced earlier where she gives up for a little bit before her three sons come in, and she has that great speech about we're the barbarians here. That moment when she gives up, that's the first moment that I think that she feels human, that she's relatable. That was the moment I knew, okay, she's not the antagonist. This is how you make a character that could absolutely have become the villain with lesser writing and make them relatable, that you don't really care who wins or loses. You're just swept up in it. And I think that's a lesson that modern Hollywood needs to take from this, is if you want to make an antagonist or a potential antagonist and make them relatable to the point where you don't really disagree with them, it's how they did it with Katharine Hepburn. She's so three-dimensional that, just like you said, you have to respect what she's doing and respect the depth to her character, because she cares. That moment where she's just pure emoting, we didn't mention it, but when she asks Henry to kiss Alice, just the emoting on her face, mostly in the eyes with the tears coming up, but still trying to show a brave face. The contradictions, that's the best thing. When emoting is a war between emotions, I think that's when it comes across the best.
Yeah.
And when it really shines through. And she's the best example of that. I think when she had very much warring interests and emotions, most people had, the goal of their scene or their reaction to a scene, but she was always drawn between two worlds, her love and her
desire
for power.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I agree with you completely. There's no hero or antagonist of this. These are just these historical figures damaged by their own schemes. I mean, there's a line. You could strangle a spider in the webs you weave. When I think Richard says it to Eleanor.
Yeah.
It's so perfect a description. They're so caught up that they've lost their humanity. And at one point, when Alice says, "Can you just be human with me for once and just show me emotion?" and Eleanor says, "For you, I will show real emotion," and they cry together for a moment. Because she saw her as a daughter and she saw her as a mother. And so I love it. And you can't get performances like that now. You can't.
Absolutely not.
I mean, this is Catherine Epper towards the end of her career. This is Peter O'Toole, I think, at the height almost of his career. And it was glorious. And that's why I've only seen parts of it. I can't even bring myself to fully look at the remake they did in 2003. Well, I love Sir Patrick Stewart, and I don't really care about Glenn Close. No, you're not replacing this.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing that.
Yeah, you can't get better than this cast.
No,
I don't think it's possible. It's not.
Anyway, all right. As I said, I could go on and on, but we would just be rambling, saying the same thing. So it's my week. So I'll go first. There are only 2 movies that I give this score to, and this is one of them. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. I have no problems with anything in this movie. I love it. I've loved it ever since I first saw it. I need to upgrade my DVD to a Blu-ray. I need to do that. I keep never getting around to it, but it fills me with joy. I hear that music begin, and I know I'm in for it. That John Barry soundtrack is just epic. The performances, the casting, the production value. There's not a missing moment in this. Not a wasted line, not a wasted expression, not a wasted scene. And yeah, well, that's a good point. Algrim's week. He forced my hand on this one. I wanted to.
Well, then rate it, Algrim. Rate it.
You'll give it a 10 out of 10 too. So 10 out of 10 for me. There's only one other movie I give it 10 out of 10, and we'll get to that one someday as well. Jed, how you feeling on it score-wise?
Well, this film was absolutely incredible. The writing of it, if nothing else, makes me feel like I should never write again because I can never compare to this. I can never, ever achieve anything. But I think I can get closer than 99% of Hollywood, so maybe it's worth trying. It's worth putting a little bit of effort in. But I do have some minor criticisms of the film, like the fight choreography. I think it could have been substantially better. And one thing that I hadn't mentioned, but I think is kind of weird more than anything else, is the lighting in this film. I don't think was that good. There was a lot of contradicting light sources. There was a lot that could have been a lot better. There's 2 great examples of it with Philip when he's in bed right before he's woken up by William and taken to the cellar. He's got that candle, right? There's a spotlight behind the candle, and it's not even like trying, and you see the candle shadow. Like they just got a studio light, put it behind the camera, shined it at 99% brightness, and it's way too bright. There's a lot of instances of that where just the lighting doesn't make sense. And I think the worst example of it is actually the climax of the film. I love the shot of Henry when he's about to execute Richard, when you see the shadow behind him and it's all glorious and bright. Even though that doesn't make sense, you can forgive it for one angle like that in a dramatic moment. But then they cut to Richard's face and the sword is casting a giant shadow on his face, which means that there'd have to be a light where we saw Henry's shadow. In that scene, there were lights from every which direction on full brightness, but it was never consistent. Like each shot had their own light source. And so it's just distracting me how often that changed. And again, this is an older film, but they had mastered lighting by the 60s, so I think it is fair to bring it up for an older film.
That's a
like
fair
this.
criticism. You see this stuff better than I do. I didn't see any of that. That is not stuff I see. So that's a fair criticism though, from a slight production value critique.
Yeah.
I accept that.
Just production value. I don't have anything to criticize when it comes to performances or writing. The only thing that I would say, even remotely writing, which is more a personal preference than what could be called a criticism, is I want more of not Philip, Jeffrey. Sorry, that's who I meant earlier with the candles.
I know you meant.
Yeah, but Jeffrey is such a fascinating character, but we get so little of him, and that's just personal preference. But I want to know more why he's like this. Delve a little bit more into his wants. Why doesn't he want to be king? I know we get a little bit of that, but I feel like he was the least developed of the family, and I just want more of him. And I know it's not necessary. I wouldn't even count that as a criticism. It's just he's fascinating to me. I want to see how he became the man who can sit on a cliff top, watch men die, but shrivels in fear when an old man comes at him with a knife. Like that dichotomy, I think that's fascinating.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. That's right.
So I am a little bit more critical than you, and I don't believe in a 10 out of 10. So, but the score is going to be immensely high for me. I'm going to give it a 9.5.
Oh wow, you guys got it. You guys know that's huge for Jed. That is huge.
It's the script alone got me most of the way there.
Yeah, it's the writing and the delivery. It's the writing of the performances. It's just so good. I'm never disappointed. Anyway, there we go. Another one in the books. Jed, what do you got for us next week?
Well, this is the holiday season, so of course we're going to have to pick some Christmas movies, and I think it's time that I reveal one of my guilty pleasures. It is not something that a man should be into as much as I am, but it's one of my Christmas favorites. I have to watch it every year, and yes, people call me gay for it, but I'm unashamed. We will be watching the 2003 romantic comedy classic, Love Actually.
Love Actually. It's been a long time since I saw Love Actually, and I've never actually. I mean, I've sat down and watched it, but it's usually because it was on TV back when I had cable. So I can honestly say it's probably been at least a decade since I saw that movie. So I have seen it, but we're gonna watch it, and it's early reactions. Listen,
I'm sorry I disappointed you.
In 2 weeks, when we come back, before we go on Christmas break, we'll be doing Hook. My choice is Hook this year. Anyways, there we go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We hope you had a good time. Hit those like buttons, subscribe to the channels, and as we get started, have a Merry Christmas, because we'll be saying that because I love Christmas. It's a great time of year. So have a Merry Christmas. We'll see you guys next time. Until then, take it easy. Have a good night or day wherever you may be.